All right. Hello, everybody. I have Patrick Coles with me here today. And Patrick has a really nice new theory on cancer called the toxin sequestration. Ah, I'll just say TST and I'll let you explain it further. Um, but we believe that this has a good effect with the carnivore diet in treating chronic disease and so forth. His theory has recently been featured on the cover of the Masters of Health magazine. So, Patrick, welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself and then you can start telling us a little bit about this theory.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on. So I'm a carnivore. I've been carnivore for about a year and a half. And I was just amazed by all the different stories, including some of the ones that you feature on your channel of people healing themselves with carnivore. In my case, I cured my allergies and my joint pain that I've had for decades with carnivore diet. And then also I do have kids on carnivore and they've, healed many of their problems with carnivore diet. So, just trying to dive deeper into why the carnivore diet works, got me motivated. And I am a scientist, so I'm a physicist, and I'm sort of the chief scientist at a tech company right now. But my scientific mind was just sort of wondering, like, hey, why is this sort of magically healing everything? And naturally, when I went on the carnivore diet, I did have some oxalate dumping, where I had some kidney pain, painful urination, and so that got me thinking about toxins. Oxalate being a plant toxin, and I had never really been familiar with plant toxins before. So I went down the rabbit hole of toxins, and interestingly, I found that there was a deep connection between toxins and chronic disease. And if we think about, what is it that has increased dramatically over the past century? So I sort of argue that it's not really necessarily germs, bacteria, viruses, parasites, etc. Those have been with us for thousands and thousands of years. But the one thing that seems to have increased over the past century is really toxins. And we seem to be getting new toxins all the time. And it seems to match the rise in chronic disease that we've seen over the past century. So it sort of checks out from a timeline perspective. And sure enough, when you dive into the medical literature, uh, you find out that, for example, Alzheimer's is connected to toxicity, Parkinson's, autism, heart disease, kidney disease, even Hashimoto's, a lot of things that they call autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. These are all connected to toxicity. And I was just amazed that there is the literature out there. Like all you have, just have to kind of look for it. And it connects all these diseases to toxins. And the basic idea is that the toxins damage the body's tissues, and then we give the disease a different name when the damage occurs in a different organ, right? So if it occurs in your arteries, it's called cardiovascular disease. If it occurs in your thyroid, it's Hashimoto's. If it occurs in your brain, it's Alzheimer's, and the list goes on and on. But that's the basic idea of my understanding of chronic disease. And I've been sort of trying to, of course, lay this toxicity-based theory out. And I'm not the only person that's had this theory. I will point out that Anthony Chafee has been pushing this, relatively hard. I think he's coming out with a book on this. And then also there's a doctor named Thomas Levy. He has a book called The Only Cause of Disease. And there he identifies basically toxicity as the only cause of disease. Now, with all that said, I didn't mention cancer yet. So, cancer is the interesting oddball in all of this mix. Um, Cancer looks like, in my theory, that it's actually not a disease. And that's where things get really unusual and strange because, you know, I view the body as amazing and brilliant, and it does things on purpose. And it looks like basically whenever we nourish our body with the correct diet, whenever we give it the correct foods, it seems to do all the rest for us. But the mainstream perspective on cancer, for example, is that our bodies are faulty. We have malignant, selfish tissue that sort of takes over our body, and our bodies just can't fight it off. And so it sort of conflicts with this viewpoint that our bodies are amazing and brilliant. And I want to offer a different perspective on cancer. And of course, this doesn't downplay the serious and harsh nature of cancer. Um, but, the basic idea of my theory is that cancer itself is not really a disease, rather, it is a symptom of toxic overload. And toxic overload is actually the true disease. And the body actually builds tumors for a reason. It builds them not because the tumors are malignant and selfish and uncontrollable, but rather because they are toxin storage vaults, because they actually store toxins and sequester the toxins. That's why it's called toxin sequestration theory, because the tumors sequester the toxins. They pull them away from the normal tissue, right? So it protects the normal tissue from the impact of the toxins. And then they just store the toxins for safekeeping. That's the basic idea of the theory. And believe it or not, I'm not the first person to have this theory. It has a rich history. It actually dates back 2,000 years to traditional Chinese medicine. They had this theory in their traditional Chinese medicine's texts 2,000 years ago. More recently, we've had several Western thinkers. The guy who founded the raw primal diet, his name is Agenus Vonderplanitz. He wrote a book where he personally had cancer and he largely healed it with like a raw carnivore diet. And so he was arguing that cancer was actually a defense mechanism against toxicity. And then more recently, there's a doctor named Tom Cowan, and he's also largely, put out the same idea that cancer basically bags up the garbage, in his words. Most recently, I was influenced by an MIT professor named Stephanie Seneff, and she's been, on several carnivore podcasts, and I was listening to her work, and she presented this theory in like biochemical detail. Like she went into all the details of how cancer cells sequester certain types of toxins. In her work, she focused on deuterium, which is found heavily in plant sugars, and it's low on the carnivore diet. It's heavy hydrogen, but in any case, it acts as a toxin. And she did work showing that cancer cells actively hoard and sequester deuterium. And furthermore, they export deuterium depleted nutrients to the body as a service, which sounds shocking, but that's really what got me started on this journey. By the way, on a personal note, listening to Stephanie Seneff's work is what got me to think about this myself. And she basically formulated this theory for deuterium. And I said, well, what if this theory applies to all toxins? And so that's how I formulated this theory. So, and we can go down the path of, you know, carnivore diet. Why is it the carnivore diet seems to work so well? And if my whole theory of chronic disease is based on toxicity, then what does carnivore diet cut out? What are the toxins that carnivore diet cuts out? And how do we think, of course, of cancer trying to sequester those toxins when they are present? And we can go down the list. And first and foremost, in my theory, the sugars, glucose and fructose, are actually toxins. And we basically, a toxin is something that causes tissue damage. And we can understand the fact that sugar causes tissue damage from the fact that people who have diabetes, which is a case of high blood sugar, they have tissue damage to their eyes, retinal damage, they have kidney damage, they have damage to their arteries, as well as damage to their peripheral nerves. This is well known. It's called diabetic complications. That's the technical term. And so that's the direct impact of sugar's toxicity. And so sugar is in fact a toxin, despite what some other influencers will say. And carnivore actually cuts that out. And I know this is a hot topic lately, but it's very simple. We can just look at the case of diabetes to see the tissue damage in action. And then we can move on to other toxins that the carnivore diet cuts out. It cuts out seed oils. Seed oils are incredibly damaging to the body. They cuts out also all the plant toxins, so the plant defense chemicals like the oxalates, as well as all the other defense chemicals. It also cuts out mold toxins because molds grow on plant-based foods. They like to eat plant sugars. So the mold toxins also are cut out on carnivore. And it also cuts out, this is underappreciated, but it cuts out the toxic metals. So if you look at the long list of toxic metals like aluminum, nickel, copper, all the heavy metals, so like mercury, cadmium, etc. So this long list of toxic metals, they are high on the plant-based diet, but on the carnivore diet, they are relatively low, actually. And of course, I also mentioned deuterium. But in any case, there's whole huge classes of toxins that the carnivore diet cuts out, and that helps to explain why carnivore is good at preventing disease, but it also helps to explain why carnivore itself could help, in the case of cancer. I mean, so now let's dive into the theory of cancer a little bit more. And so, in this theory, we're arguing that the cancer tumors, anytime the body builds extra tissue, uh, it's doing it for a reason. And so my worldview is that the body is amazing, it's brilliant, and it doesn't make mistakes. And so when the body builds a cancer tumor, it supplies infrastructure to that tumor. It actually builds new blood vessels to supply blood to the tumor, and it also builds a mechanical scaffold in order to physically support the tumor and hold it into place. So it invests all this infrastructure into actually supporting the tumor, both mechanically as well as with actual, blood flow. And why would the body do this if the tumor was in fact the enemy? And uh, interestingly, there's real evidence. I'm not just like coming up with this theory without actual evidence. A lot of the toxins that I just mentioned, for example, I mentioned seed oils. Seed oils have been found in the medical literature to dramatically concentrate at high levels inside of cancer cells. There's literally just balls of seed oils floating around as lipid droplets inside of seed oils. So cancer cells are packed full of seed oils. And you might say, well, why do they like seed oil so much? What's the purpose? And in fact, they're not doing anything with it. They're literally just storing the seed oils for safekeeping in these lipid droplets, and they're not actually using the seed oils for any purpose. The same is true for some of the other toxins that I mentioned, like oxalate. I mentioned oxalate. Uh, in breast cancer, oxalate has been found in a 10 times higher concentration inside breast tumor tissue than inside normal breast tissue. So cancer cells in the breast are highly concentrated, packed full of oxalate. Oxalate is purely a toxin. It serves no biological purpose whatsoever. Why would cancer cells love to store oxalate? So, and the list goes on further. I mentioned the toxic metals. The heavy metals have also been found in high concentrations inside the cancer cells, and they actively pull them in too. And I want to sort of address the theory that, well, maybe those toxins just got in there by accident. That's not the case. They actually pull them in. They actively pull them in. So for example, with the seed oils, they upregulate a transporter to rapidly pull the seed oils in out of the body fluids. And so they are actively pulling these in. They upregulate their metal transporters to pull in the toxic metals as well. Um, and we can also go back to the sugars, and that's where things get kind of interesting. But because sugar has been identified as a fuel source for cancer growth. It's well known that in Thomas Seyfried's theory that he says that sugar fuels cancer growth. And I, really want to, thank Thomas Seyfried for his tremendous pioneering work. He really is the one who debunked the mainstream medicine's genetic theory of cancer, as well as, promoted low sugar diets for treating cancer. And I just want to propose to interpret it from a different angle. Um, if we view sugar not as a fuel source, but rather as a toxin, then we can understand it like, oh, cancer has a insatiable appetite for sugar because cancer is working really freaking hard to help the body reduce the blood sugar levels, because high blood sugar is a toxic situation that damages your vital organs. If you do have high blood sugar, you're going to get damage to your vital organs. And cancer, being a team player, something that the body created on purpose, is pulling in sugar like crazy. Now, cancer cells dramatically upregulate their sugar transporters on their cell surface, their glucose and their fructose transporters, to rapidly pull in sugar. And my view on that is that they're doing it because they're trying to detoxify the sugar. It's not because they want to grow. It's not because they just want to grow, 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 grow. It's because they're trying to act as a detox organ. And we can think of the body's primary detox organ, by the way, is the liver. And in my theory, I sort of think of a cancer tumor as like the body's second liver. And sure enough, with fructose, for example, fructose is detoxified normally by the liver, but many people who have cancer have liver damage. Uh, so, for example, people who have alcohol-driven cancers typically have liver damage due to chronic alcohol consumption. And so, in my theory, basically the body says, well, my first detox organ is gone, my liver's damaged, so I need a new detox organ, and that's why I have to build a cancer tumor to help me handle all this toxic load. And so then the cancer tumor becomes the new detox organ to detoxify fructose, and in the case of alcohol-driven cancers, to detoxify ethanol as well. It's been shown that the cancer tumors dramatically upregulate precisely the enzymes needed to detoxify ethanol, drinking alcohol, in drinking-related cancers. And the same is true for smoking-driven cancers. In smoking-driven cancers, they upregulate precisely the suite of enzymes needed to detoxify the toxic chemicals in cigarette smoke. And so it's looking like it's acting like a detox organ. And you can understand why the body supplies it with so much blood supply, because it has to get the toxins to the cancer tumor in the bloodstream so that it can detoxify it. So it has to supply a lot of blood to the cancer tumor. So that's the basic idea of my theory. I'll just mention one more thing, which is that my theory also helps to explain why cancer tumors appear in certain organs and not other organs. Uh, so it's well known that cancer appears commonly in the prostate, the breast, the lungs, the liver, but not, and also the skin as well, but not in the heart. So this is an asymmetry because in the mainstream theory, cancer is due to randomness. It's random genetic mutations. So if everything was random, you would expect cancer to uniformly appear equally in every organ, including the heart. But my theory is saying that the body is amazing, it's brilliant, and it's strategic. And so that means that it makes strategic decisions about where to build tumors and where not to build them. In the case of the liver and the lungs, they're under a lot of toxic burden. So the lungs is the primary site for all the inhaled toxins. And so naturally, the body just builds a tumor right there where the toxins are located to sequester those toxins in the lungs and prevent those inhaled toxins from entering into the rest of the body. In the case of the liver, that's the body's primary detox organ. And so it is full of toxins. And so naturally, liver cancer is common because that has a high toxic burden. In the case of the prostate, that's where things are really interesting. Now, the prostate is very common as a cancer, but strategically, the prostate is not a very important organ. It's kind of low on the list of important organs. So in a sense, the body is willing to sacrifice this less important organ uh, because it's not an immediate threat to survival if that organ gets damaged. And furthermore, the prostate is very, very good at storing fats, fatty acids, and seed oils are the primary driver of prostate cancer. So it's looking like prostate tumors are like seed oil storage vaults. So just because prostate cells are really good at storing fats. So anyway, that can explain why some of those cancers are common. But on the flip side, heart cancer like never happens. Like if you talk to a cardiologist, they rarely see a single case of heart cancer in their entire career. And we can understand that because if the body did build a heart tumor, it would immediately threaten survival of the organism. And basically, it could interfere with the heart's ability to pump the blood. And so the body being strategic is not going to want to threaten its own survival. So it's going to try to avoid building a heart tumor there. Yeah, so I think that kind of gives the basic idea of the theory. So if you have any questions, Brian, let me know.
Yeah, this is fascinating. So let me make sure that I understand exactly, because I think I do, but I just want to make sure. So basically, with this theory, we're saying that a cancerous tumor is your body's attempt to get rid of too much toxins within the body, correct?
That is correct. Or or at least to store them, at least to keep them away from the normal tissue. That's right. It wants to keep it
Yeah.
away from the normal tissue. Yeah.
Okay. Now, does the body have any way to do anything else with it, or is the idea just that that tumor is just there, and if there's a lot of really bad toxicity, is that how the tumors get bigger and spread?
Yes, that's exactly right. So we're not, in this theory, we're not interpreting it as cancer just wants to grow, grow, grow. We're interpreting it as cancer is forced to grow whenever the toxic load increases. So whenever there's more toxins around, the body says, I need you to grow bigger to store more toxins. And then the same could be interpreted for metastasis. Metastasis is the idea that cancer shows up in like another organ somewhere else in the body. And we can view metastasis not as spread, but rather as the body needs a new storage vault because the toxic load has increased and it needs a second storage vault. It's that simple.
Okay. So let's say someone has cancer
Yes.
and they decide that they're going to go on a carnivore or a very low carb diet. They're going to get rid of the sugar in their diet. They're going to get rid of the seed oils and all that kind of stuff. Um, will that help to reduce those tumors that are already there?
Yeah, so there is a phenomenon. It's called spontaneous tumor regression, STR. It's well documented in the medical literature. And it's basically people who have abstained from conventional medical treatment and instead, and they had a cancer diagnosis and they decided not to do the conventional treatments. And instead, they just changed their diet and their lifestyle to reduce their toxic load. And it has been witnessed that some of those people have complete disappearance or regression of their tumors naturally. And the medical mainstream has a hard time explaining this. They view it as kind of a miracle. But from our perspective in this theory, I'm viewing it as basically when the toxic load goes down, the body basically says, well, I don't need that storage vault anymore. So I can decommission my toxin storage vault and sort of just take it apart and let it go because I don't need to store toxins anymore. So, and that's the basic idea behind using a carnivore diet to treat cancer is that it could encourage this spontaneous tumor regression phenomenon. With that said, you can imagine that the body does have priorities, and probably its first priority when you do go on a carnivore diet is to heal your primary detox organ, which is the liver. So I would imagine that most likely when people go on carnivore, the body tries to first probably heal the liver first, and then it'll get to the cancer tumor later whenever it's ready. So it can't, in other words, it can take time, is what I'm saying, is that it doesn't necessarily go in the order that we might want it to do. And of course, we have it in our brains that the tumor is the enemy. And I'm, slowly trying to change that perception. But it's not easy because people have that in their head for years. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question, for someone that goes through standard like chemotherapy, um, what is that doing? Is that, because I'm not familiar with this at all. So is
Sure.
that trying to shrink the tumors, or what exactly does chemotherapy
Yeah.
do, and how would this fit in to
Absolutely.
the theory?
Yeah, so cancer cells' job is to sequester, store, and process toxins, but they're already under a lot of stress in today's modern diet, right? With people eating seed oils and eating toxic metals and all these things. So they're already kind of full of toxins. And if you then overwhelm the body with a mega dose of more toxins, then you can push the cancer cells over the edge and then they can die, they can burst, they can do what's called apoptosis and just die. And that is precisely what typical mainstream treatments do. That is typically what they do. They try to push the cancer cells over the edge by mega dosing with toxins. And that's what, when I looked up online, like I asked an AI, like, what is the chemical that's actually the most toxic out of all the other chemicals out there? And what they identified was chemotherapy. So they said chemotherapy is actually the most toxic that they were aware of, right? More toxic than seed oils, cigarette smoke, ethanol, glucose and fructose. So chemotherapy is even more toxic than those chemicals. And so that basically pushes the cancer cells over the edge and actually kills them. So In my view, it is a unnatural way of trying to shrink your tumor. There is a natural way of trying to shrink your tumor, which is going on a low toxin diet like carnivore diet. That is a natural way to do it. The unnatural way is to attack the tumor with toxic chemicals. And the mainstream approach takes the latter. So yeah.
Okay. And then, so oftentimes you'll hear from somebody that they had cancer and then they beat cancer going through chemotherapy and so forth, and then sometime later they get it back. With this theory, the idea is that they really haven't changed their diet, so they're overloading their body again with the toxins. Is that what the theory would be saying?
Yeah, that's right. So, and one of the common questions I get is, well, why do people die of cancer? And obviously, this is very tragic. And in my theory, toxicity is the cause of all disease. And so, um, you know, people die of toxic overload. And so, cancer is a situation where you do have toxic overload. And already, people, when they do have cancer, they're in a precarious situation of having toxic overload and having potential damage to their vital organs, like I mentioned, liver damage, for example. And the treatments themselves are toxic, can be toxic. And so that can push people closer towards mortality. I realize that this is a controversial statement, but the combination of the existing toxic load that's already inside the body, and as well as the, treatments themselves can push people closer towards mortality. And that's why it is concerning to do this approach of having a tumor, attacking it with toxins, and then now retoxifying the body with the tumor, with the toxins that were stored in the cancer cell nicely. The body had them nicely stored up, right? And then now you just burst open the bag of toxins and allow the toxins to roam freely. So in addition to the toxins in the treatment, you've also retoxified the body with everything that was stored up in that cancer tumor. Uh, and now the body is scrambling to find a new solution. And it's like, how the heck do I deal with all these toxins that are in my body fluids? And that forces it sometimes to build an even more aggressive tumor, like an even bigger tumor, or an even, or metastasis, right? Where you have multiple tumors. And so this is why it can be a vicious cycle to attack a cancer tumor with toxic chemicals, because it's sort of like self-reinforcing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, I have definitely heard from people that are doing carnivore that had cancer. They went to carnivore and they have at least gone into remission or whatever. So this theory really fits well for those people.
Yeah.
What experiences they're having.
That's wonderful. I mean, that is absolutely wonderful because that is the right way to do it, in my opinion. Like just going on a low toxin diet, that is the right approach. It's almost like less is more because people are always looking for complicated treatment protocols, and I'm like, less is more. Like just go on the low toxin diet, and that is the way to do it. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think this has been a great conversation. I want to ask you lastly, is there anything more that you want to add or recap or anything before we finish up this interview?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. And if people want to find out more, they can, go to my channel on YouTube. Oxalate Warrior is my YouTube name, and I also post blog posts on Substack. Um, and I just wanted to say that this theory was developed by the carnivore community for the carnivore community to explain why carnivore is so good at helping with chronic disease and cancer. And I would just say that I think it's the first cancer theory to come out of the carnivore community, whereas the previous Thomas Seyfried's theory was more about the keto diet. I'm arguing that carnivore is actually even better than the keto diet because it actually cuts out more toxins. So this can help explain why carnivore is potentially even better than keto. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna have your description or your your YouTube channel name in the description below. So anybody that wants to go to your channel, you can check it out from the description. And I hope that you're able to reach a lot more people with this theory and really, get people thinking about it and so forth because this is a big problem in our society and this to me this theory is really fascinating. It seems to make a lot of sense to me. So thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it.